Thanks, Chris. And I think I spied a Rocket book. Is that what that is?
You
the Rocket
did,
book?
Yes. That's going to be the big Rocket
I have
book
one
thing.
of those.
Yeah.
They are awesome.
It's pretty cool because you can write in it, erase it, or upload your notes to the computer and kind of take that. So it's pretty cool. You can win it. So go.
Yeah, very cool. I'm gonna be participating.
Sweet.
All right, let me jump into it here. So today I want to talk about relevance-based matching. We've had a couple webinars or community shows in the past about matching between me and Suchin, and this is really a deep dive and one of the newer features in our matching repertoire. So let me start by kind of introducing what relevance-based matching is, especially in the context of how matching worked previously. So I call the previous match strategy binary matching, as opposed to what I'm going to be talking about today, relevance matching. In the previous way of matching, everything was logic-based. So it's every operand evaluated to a true or false, and you needed all trues at the end to have a match considered. Whereas with relevance-based matching, every operand evaluates to a numerical score, and those numerical scores are weighted, and if the final value of the score of the match rule at the end of evaluation is over a certain threshold, an action will occur. So there's really one of two outcomes in a binary match rule. You can either match or not match. Whereas in a relevance-based rule, you can have multiple outcomes. You can choose whether to immediately merge, have a potential match, or even have a potential match with a label of maybe weak match or something so the data stewards can prioritize. So there's a lot of advantages of the relevance-based matching in terms of what you can do inside of a single rule. And they do work a little differently, but there are a lot of things that are still the same. So we're still going to be tokenizing all of our attributes. We still use the same comparator classes and dictionaries. And at the end of the day, there are auto matches or merges and suspect matches, just like before. So that's generally an introduction of how it's different than our base matching platform. And to kind of give an overview, each attribute in your match rule, so say you have a first name, a last name, an address, line 1, a city, a state, will have a weighting, and by default they're all weighted equally. So you can set a threshold score, say maybe 80% or 0.8, and if you break that threshold score, it'll auto merge. And one of the really cool things here is you can set a second threshold, maybe from 60% to 80%, where it won't auto merge, but it'll create a potential match. So now you have what would normally take one rule to configure, or two rules to configure in the binary strategy, done in one, and a lot more flexibility. So if one particular attribute does not match, it's still possible to have a match outcome, whereas that wouldn't be the case in binary. So I hope that kind of gives an overview of what relevance matching is versus our traditional matching from before. So why would you want to use relevance-based matching as opposed to our old system? One of the advantages is you get to maintain a lot fewer match rules. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is because previously a lot of customers would have maybe a match rule on first and last name that would use exact first and last name as criteria. And then that would be an auto merge. And then they'd have a second rule where first and last name were set to fuzzy, and that would be a suspect match, because we might not feel confident enough to take that fuzzy match and have it automatically merge without a data steward's oversight. With relevance-based matching, we can have one match rule cover both a potential match and an auto match, and that's one way you can reduce the number of rules you have to maintain. Another way is because it evaluates to a score instead of a Boolean. Previously, you might have one match rule that's a combination of name, address, and email, and another that's name, address, and phone number. And they're very, very similar rules, right? It's just the email versus the phone number you're using to change how they evaluate. Well, you could have email and phone number both in one rule, and as long as the score is coming out, even if maybe email matched and phone didn't, or phone matched and email didn't, if you set your thresholds correctly, you can cover both of those scenarios with only one rule. So there's quite a lot of opportunity to reduce the amount of rules you have to maintain, and that's going to make your life easier in terms of your Reltio admins and what they have to keep up with and maintain going on. The other advantage is those dynamic rules. So there's a lot more dynamicism when you aren't evaluating to simply true or false. So within a rule, you can actually tune the rule without changing what you're evaluating, just the end score. So previously, you would have to take attributes in or out to change the outcome of a rule set. Now you can leave the same attributes and just tune the threshold at which you decide to merge or decide to match. So if you feel like you're under matching when your threshold is set to 80%, you can drop that down to 75 or 70 and change nothing else about your rule to cast a little bit of a wider net. And the last big advantage of relevance-based matching is because you can have multiple outcomes. Say you have a rule that only evaluates the potential match. You can actually put those in two buckets, a strong potential match and a weak potential match. That lets your data stewards go through the strong potential matches first, get that low-hanging fruit, get that easy value early before they go through working through the weak matches, which might not have as much value. So that prioritization can be really, really great in terms of making the best of your time and getting to value a little more quickly. So there's two ways to configure a relevance-based match rule, just like any match rule. It can be configured through the UI inside the data modeler. And this screenshot to the left kind of gives you a preview of what that could look like. Or it can be configured in your L3 through the API. My recommendation to you would be to start with the data modeler in the UI because it's a lot easier to use. It builds all that syntax for you. And after you save it, it'll automatically be added to your L3 and you can customize it from there. There are a few features that are only available if you're manually editing the JSON that you can't do from the UI. But if you go ahead and get that base rule built, you can go back and tweak it with things like weightings. So in this particular example, we see first name, last name, and suffix are being used to match. First name and last name don't have a weighting assigned inside this weights array. So if no weighting assigned, they're assigned a weighting of 1.0 or 100%. By default, everything has a weighting of 1.0. Now, in this example, we don't want suffix like a junior or senior doesn't have the same amount of value in determining if two individuals are the same as first and last name do. So the decision was made to include suffix, but give it a very light weight, 0.2. So suffix doesn't carry anywhere near the same, or only 20% of the value that first or last name carry. And this is a great example of something you can do with relevance-based matching that you wouldn't be able to do with the previous version of matching. Previously, you would just have the exact or null, and if this evaluated the false, this was thrown out the window altogether. So if you had a scenario where you had a junior and somebody who didn't include their junior in another crosswalk, they would not have matched. But in this example, they will. And in the lower part here, you can see the action threshold. So it's going to auto merge at an 82% to 100% match and become a potential match at 0.4 to 0.8. On the left side, you can see this is actually managed by a little UI, I don't know what you call this, bar that you can drag and drop to the points you want. So from here, I'm going to jump into the UI and actually configure a rule from scratch for you.
So quick question or thought. So for context, this level of matching, is it used to reconcile disparate data sources in Reltio? Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, you're bringing together, you loaded maybe a Salesforce system and a HubSpot system, and you want to find which of the individuals exists both in your sales system and your marketing system.
Okay. And then, so Danny says, seems like a great improvement. But then another question from Steve is, if one record has senior and the other has junior, would those still incorrectly, would they still match incorrectly if you have the weight for the suffix very low?
So they will match incorrectly, right? So we'll get this suffix, if one's junior and one's senior, will be no match at all, right? Because we're using, in this example, the exact match token. So it's still evaluating true or false. And what's going to happen is we're going to have 100% plus 100% plus 0% for suffix. And that's going to be divided by basically the highest possible value, which would be 2.2. And that score will land in one of these two categories. I think in that scenario, the score would probably still be in that 80 to 100% range. So they would auto merge. And as a tuning exercise, you could see that it's landing in that range, and maybe tighten this up and move this up to a 0.95 to 1, that sort of thing. So that's a really good question. You have to think about how you weight things and what your action thresholds are. So if you're getting incorrect juniors and seniors merging, you might want to increase the weight of suffix or tighten your action thresholds. But something that can happen that wouldn't happen with the binary matching.
Okay. And one last question before the demo. Well, it's not the last one, but for this. Let's say first name between the records are compared, then the resilient, will be between 0 and 1, but the same is between 0 to 0.2 for suffix. Is that the understanding? Is that kind of right? So
I think the question is, if I understand it correctly, is what happens if these two thresholds overlap? What if this one was from 0.04 to 0.09, and this one's from 0.8 to 1.0? So we have an overlap from 0.8 to 0.9. If there's an overlap in the two thresholds, it goes with the potential match over the auto merge. So it plays it safe and doesn't overmatch for you.
Okay. There are two other questions, but let's get going a little bit, and then I'll ask those here in a minute. I promise, Manuel. And
all right, sounds good.
All right.
Okay, so one last question on that. Will we be able to see the actual value of the weight by using VerifyMatch or any other API?
Yes, you will. It's not visible in the UI yet, unfortunately. So I'm gonna show you an API that'll let you see that.
Cool. Thanks, Joel.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yep, still a newer feature. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into my demo tenant here, and I am going to configure a relevance-based match rule from scratch. So you do this by clicking the chocolate bar on the top right and going to console. When console has loaded, we're going to go to the data modeler. I'm going to make a match rule for contacts. And I'll go to match rule here and hit create new. I'm going to call this demo rule. My scope is internal, so I only want to match within my own tenant, not within data tenants or anything like that. So I'm going to leave this set to internal. And I'm only going to consider the operational values, so I'm going to leave this checked as well. For match type, this is where you switch between the traditional binary rules versus relevance. Relevance is actually the default now. It started checked here. And a recommendation I would make when you're designing rules and you're testing, do not start with an automatic merge turned on. It's kind of difficult to, it's easier to tune and evaluate rules when it's they're only creating potential matches. So I'm going to create 2 potential match actions. Eventually, I'm going to call this, let's say, I'll call this super strong matches. And this one I'll probably eventually would come back and turn into an auto match. But for now, I'm going to leave it as a potential so that I have a chance to tune things before things are actually merged and I have to go and unmerge them. And the second one I'm going to label as weak matches. So strong matches, I'm going to start with 85% as my threshold. And for my weak matches, I'm going to set 8.4, 84% as my high end. And my low end is maybe, let's make it 0.4. So something you'll see here is the UI will kindly tell you not to leave a gap in between the two ranges. So that's a good best practice to remember. You want your two ranges to touch. And you can actually create multiple ranges. So if you wanted to create really weak matches for some reason, let's see, let's call these super weak. You could even have a third one that with a range in between these two. There we go. But for now, I'm just going to have the two ranges. There we go. Get this back to 0.8. And I'm going to have strong matches and weak matches. So scroll down a bit further, and the next step is to choose which attributes are going to be considered. So I'm going to consider first name, last name, address line 1, and zip 5 for my example. When matching within the US only, I like zip 5 as a simpler way of effectively matching on city and state. So now that I've decided on these attributes, I'm going to hit build match rule. And here is my kind of starting form of a match rule. So the first step I'm going to do is select a comparator. So for first name, let's say I'm going to make this fuzzy, right? There's lots of nicknames and things out in the world, so I'm going to choose fuzzy as my operator. For my match token, I'm going to choose the double metaphone match token. So this finds names that sound alike, that sort of thing. And I'll choose a double metaphone comparator to match. You always want your match token to match your comparator. And I'm going to apply the Reltio name dictionary. This checks for nickname matches, that sort of thing, which is super handy. For last name, I'm going to choose the exact match operator. And I'm going to do the exact match token. And basic string comparator. I'm not going to apply the name dictionary to the last name. Address line 1, I'm going to choose the address line match token and the address line comparator. Zip 5, I'm going to do the exact match token and string comparator. All right, so I have chosen a token and a comparator for all of my attributes now, and I'm ready to build my match rule. So let's go ahead and save it. So if I go back to my tenant and search for match rules, I will not find my demo rule evaluating to anything. My demo rule didn't pop up with any potential matches, and that is because I have not rebuilt my match table. So a good rule to remember, anytime you make a change to your match rules, go ahead and rebuild your match table. You can get there from the tenant management pane in the console, and there's even a link right here to take you there even more quickly. So let me kick off this jump. I'm going to make it distributed with a few parts so it processes a little quicker, and I'm going to apply it only to contact because that's where I made my match roll. All right, this should take just a few minutes. This would be a good time for a question while we wait.
Yep. So 2 questions. Is it possible to have 2 systems providing different set of fields, like system 1, first name, last name, suffix, age, and system, and number 2, first name, last name, height? Can we use relevance-based matching in that way?
Yeah, so if one system doesn't supply all of the attributes, relevance-based matching could provide a match where binary wouldn't. So that would be a kind of cool scenario for that.
Okay. And the last question is, what happens when you give wrong, like comparator, like token class? Does it only affect the performance, or any mismatches can occur to the record?
Yeah, I think with the wrong comparator, you're probably most likely going to undermatch because they're not going to be in alignment. You're going to miss matches. And you definitely could get some poor performance with bad tokenization, that sort of thing. While we're waiting, there is a really good document. Let's see if I can find this on the fly, of comparators and token classes. Let's see if I can. Yeah, I think this is it. Yeah, and so this is a table of the different comparators that are available. And in the notes here, it'll tell you which token class or classes work best with each of these. So like the basic string comparator works really well with the exact match token, right? We're just trying to see if 2 strings are similar. But like a fuzzy comparator could use this, I can never pronounce this, but Levestein distance, or it could use the metaphone or the double metaphone or the sound X. There's all sorts of options when you go that route. So pretty difficult to memorize, but if you use this this document, it's pretty helpful for keeping track of what's useful or what works together. I'm going to put this in chat real quick.
Yeah, cool. And I'll make sure that gets like that. We do have one more question, that maybe kind of 2, but for at least now 1. So Manuel asks, can we assign a variable weight to a fuzzy match, so depending on how much the string is matched?
Good question. So that does not work that way yet, but it would be awesome if it did. So it's still going to evaluate to if there was a fuzzy match or not, and then apply that weighting. So if it did fuzzy match, you get the weighting. If it didn't, you get 0. That would be a great opportunity for enhancement, though, to have like a dynamic weighting based on how tight that fuzzy match was.
And Manuel, I would I'll put this in the chat here in a bit, but go to the ideation portal and then submit your idea. And then what I would do if I were you, I'd post it on community and get a bunch of other people to vote for it. Is it ready? I just want to make sure, because there's a question or 2 already in here. So if it's not,
just finished.
Okay.
But it's up to you whether you want to take another question.
So Shaitan, I don't know if this is an additional question, but he does say, it's kind of from a previous question, but by default, when we have a match rule, can we restrict the match to match with only 1 entity? So for example, I have 5 entities and I need to match only with 2 entities, leaving the other 3 entities aside.
That's a tricky one. So you only want it to ever merge once. So the way you would prevent that from happening, if it's possible, would be to use something like equals. I don't think there's a count on crosswalks, though. Because you would need a count on crosswalks, and you would say, hey, if it already has more than 1 crosswalk, don't merge again. And I'm not sure if that would be possible. That would be a good question for the community, because somebody's going to have to think about that and play with it a little bit to see if they can get it working.
So Chetan, it's funny, I was going to say that, Joel, is maybe post that particular question on the community. And then we can see if either Joel or somebody else could go in and just play with it, mess with it, and maybe give you a better answer, if that makes sense. And, you know, that'd be good for the contest, you know, starting tomorrow. So if you haven't heard about it, I'll say it at the end. Keep going, Joel. Thanks.
All right. So in the spirit of live demos, let's see if my match rule correctly evaluated. All right, I'm gonna look for match rules. Demo rule, look at that. I have 817 records that have a demo rule match. So let's look at Pat Murphy here. All right, and I'm gonna go to the same as view or potential match view. This is the new same as view that's kind of recently come out. I really like to click this show comparison view because it makes it feel more like the old one. And we can see that these two records are incredibly similar. That's because I loaded the same data set twice. And it evaluated as a match on the demo rule. What is conspicuously missing is from the data modeler, when we configure our demo rule, I want to know if this is a super strong match or a weak match. And it does not show here. The way you will find out if it is a super strong or weak match while you're tuning your match rules is to grab the URI here at the top, open Postman, grab a fresh token, and you're going to use the entities API followed by the ID of your record, followed by /_matches. I'm going to just put this in chat, but it's just the entities API followed by _matches. So you should have this probably in your Postman collection already. So I can see there are one object under my demo match rule group. We can see a copy of the record in here. And let's see. At the very bottom here, we can see it got a relevance score of 100 and or 1.0, and that's because I loaded the same data set twice. These are exact duplicates, and the match action label, that is tricky to say, came as a super strong. So if it evaluated differently, it might have came as a weak match. But this is how you check the score. I think eventually this will probably be in the UI, so you can see what the evaluation came to here without having to do this. But for now, this is unfortunately what we have to do. And one other way to look at a match and evaluate, and this is a tip I gave out in the previous demo, is the entities API VerifyMatches API. And this one will show you attribute by attribute how it was evaluated. And not instead of passing the URI as a parameter, you pass it as a part of the body. So I'm going to grab the URI of my target record and the matched record. Hopefully this text isn't too small. I'll try and zoom in a little bit and see if. Okay, Postman doesn't support Zoom, does it? I can move this to the browser. That'll help. Here we go. So this is the VerifyMatch API, and it shows all the rules it matched under. So these are all turned off for now, but the match table is maintained, so it's still coming up. But here's the demo rule I just set up. We can see all the tokens generated by this and by the other entity, and the tokens that overlapped. We see the relevance score attribute by attribute. So at the highest level, it's a 1. Across this grouping, it's a 1, and then each individual attribute can go 1. So you can see as it rolls up from the individual attribute to the group to the rule overall to see how your relevance score was calculated and to see what outcome came about. We see the match action is a potential match. So the Matches API and the VerifyMatches API, both well documented in the doc portal, are very handy for this sort of thing. I'm going to throw a copy of this in the chat just in case anyone wants it. All right. So now that I have my potential matches for relevance-based matching, something I want to show that might be a cool prelude to my upcoming webinar is how to do the potential match workflow. So I have these 817 potential matches, and I'm going to segment this somehow. I'm going to segment this by, say, by city. I'm going to choose Detroit. So Detroit is a target market for my company, and I want my data stewards to evaluate the matches in Detroit first. So I have my 24 potential matches for my demo rule, and I want to queue these up to be evaluated. The way you would do that is once you have the entities in your search perspective that you want to target, you click this ... over here in the top right and request match review. Now what that's going to do is queue all of these up for a workflow, and you'll get a notification at the bottom when it's done. So match reviews were successfully submitted. And because I'm a one-man show, I'm going to submit the workflows and also be the person in charge of processing them. So this is my inbox, and as a data steward, I could click one of these and begin evaluating. So it nicely puts the names, the addresses, all the key attributes right next to each other. Looking here at this Randy Mott, I see that these two people seem to have the exact same data down to the dots and T's. So I'm going to make a decision by clicking the task action and decide to merge these. So I have taken you from building a relevance-based rule to evaluating the effectiveness of your rule with the APIs, to queuing up a workflow for your data steward, and finally resulting in a few matches at the end of the day. So that is kind of a full life cycle of developing a relevance-based match rule. I think now might be a good time to take a couple more questions.
Great. We'll have some. So I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer this question or not, but is match score not planned to become visible in the UI in the next release?
That is a great question I should have looked up before this demo, but I'm afraid I'm not sure. I'd have to go check the release docs.
Okay, and then by the way, we have a webinar coming up, and that is a webinar, not a show, on the release stuff, I think on Tuesday. So if you check out the community and events section, you'll see if you haven't RSVP'd for that. And that's a good question to ask. So I know that Gino kind of answered this, but I want maybe a more detailed answer. So let's say I have a profile with two different persons matched due to a bad match rule. Now I'm changing survivorship rule, and in turns the OV value gets changed. Is matching going to recapture or rematch the profile with the new OV values with the rest of the profiles?
And the answer to that will depend on whether this flag is checked. So if you match by operational value, it's only going to consider the OV. So a change in survivorship could result in a change of OV, which could result in a change in matches. If this were disabled, all the crosswalks were being considered anyway, so there'd be no change in the outcome. I think most of my customers stick with this. It's a good best practice because turning this off uses a lot of resources and kind of slows down your matching. You have to maintain a lot more tokens. So I'd say in most cases, updating your survivorship could change your potential matches.
Okay. And it looks like, I think Gino answered this one. Is weight mandatory?
Not. So that's a good question. It defaults to 1, and you can't even maintain it in the default rules builder. But if you go to the advanced editor, you can see the JSON. So you don't actually even have to pull the L3. And if you have the had some sample code. Let's see. If you go to the advanced editor, you can update the JSON for the rule right here and add the weights. So that's something I meant to show you that I didn't actually get to. So let me do that real quick.
Just thought you were going to have a short demo.
So in this example, I want to weight the address heavier than the name for some reason. So I set both the weights of the names to 0.8, whereas the address is undefined, which makes it a 1.0 by default. So if I add these weights to the advanced editor, though, you'll notice that I cannot go back to the rules builder anymore. So you want to figure out what attributes you want to consider and get all that sorted out first before you go adding in the weights, because you're not going to be able to go back once you do, unless you remove the weights, of course. Like I can take this out, and now I can go back to the pretty UI editor.
Great. Some more questions here. Angie, you have to make me read all this, but I'll try. So recently we added a rule and we'll begin testing. So auto.85 to 1 or 0.75 to 0.85, suspect review 1, and 0.60 to 0.75 is suspect review 2. If I understand correctly, these 3 buckets are not really visible. It will go either to auto merge or go to suspect, which threshold on the review is not visible. Example, I cannot assign only review 1 bucket to a steward. Any reply to that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I know exactly. I think I know where your head's at there. If I had, let me go to an example with multiple potential matches, actually. So I'm going to do that by
the way, Gino's on a roll. Like I'm just scrolling here and he's starting to answer some of them. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So Craig Berry here has 3 potential matches. Now, if I were a data steward, I would love to have these matches ranked in order of their relevance score, right? Like, why would I evaluate the 0.6 match before I evaluate the 0.9, right? Because 90% is better. But yeah, right now in the UI, there is nowhere it displays, nor does it sort these by that relevance score. So I would definitely go back to the tune into that upcoming release. There might be a feature enhancement coming here. And another consideration would be a custom workflow. So you might be able to configure a custom workflow in such a way that it assigns certain buckets to certain data stewards. Nothing out of the box on that right now, but definitely a good candidate for enhancement requests.
Hey, Joel, this is Gino. A quick question for you. You're looking at the early access view of the potential matches. If you were in the current GA view, would it show the score there?
It will not. That's actually why I was using the early access one. I was hoping it would be in here, and then I figured I should just get used to it. I'll double check.
The other thing the other idea I had on Angie's request was that although you can't do it by the type, right? If you knew that the score was between 75 and 85, right? In the facet that you were in before, where you can look at the match scores, you can just filter on the 75 and 85, and that would have a similar effect, right? That's the
Yeah,
number of
let's-
matches. There's a match score facet.
Oh man, I'm learning something on my own webinar. Look at this.
Community show. But
Or
yeah.
community show, sorry.
I think it's already restricted because you have the number of potential matches.
Oh, you're right.
Get rid of that. And maybe it's because of the rule. Maybe there's nothing in there with that rule. I don't know.
You know, I think this might be the match score from you know, the in the binary way where they have like the base
Oh,
match.
got it.
I think
maybe.
it might be that one.
Okay.
But that would have, yeah. So the binary match has a different way of kind of weighting the quality of a match. And I don't think they're in the same facet yet.
Okay. Sorry, Angie. I thought that would have done it, but apparently it's not.
So some more questions for you, Joel. Is the matching rules by source system? So please assume data coming from different sources having different set of attributes.
So it doesn't consider the different source systems. So if you have an incomplete data set from one system, you're going to, in the old way of matching, you'd have to configure a few rules specifically for that, right? You'd have to consider which attributes were available and make a rule to kind of bring that set into the fold. With relevance-based matching, as long as enough of the attributes that are in a match rule are populated by a data set that it can get over that threshold, it's possible that it can match even with a, I guess, incomplete set, right? Like if first name wasn't included, last name and address only, it's possible that with last name and address, we could get a 0.8 and still end up in the potential match range. Whereas with the binary match rule, if first name was missing and we weren't using exact or null, it would always evaluate the false. So you should definitely consider these relevance-based rules if you have sources with like really limited data sets.
Great. On potential matches screen, is there a way to filter by specific match rules, or others are excluded?
So when you're on, you can filter by match rules in the advanced search to choose which records come up. And if I only have one match rule turned on in this tenant right now, but for example, if these two records matched on 2 or 3 different rules, all 2 or 3 rules would show here under this and say, hey, it matched on 3 rules, not just this one. But there isn't a way to filter like, can I just see this particular rule for now? That's not a feature that would fall in the enhancement request territory for now.
Great. Also, what's a good roadmap or best practice to transition from binary to relevance and see the impact of relevance matching that demonstrates an improvement over what we're seeing now?
Yeah, so the first thing I would do is I would look for rules that evaluate to a potential match and auto match that are very similar and look for a way to combine those. You're going to be managing half as many tokens that way, and you're going to have better performance. So that would be the first thing I would look for, where I can turn 2 rules into 1. The next thing I would look for would be rules that are similar except for 1 attribute. So there are a lot of pseudo identifiers in the world, like email or phone number, that almost perfectly identify individuals. And a common best practice before was to kind of build different rules around different identifiers. With relevance-based matching, you can consider all the pseudo identifiers at once and just weight them and consolidate there. And another great, I'm going to go off script here, way to look into how to build a good relevance-based rule is the Match IQ builds relevance-based rules by default. So let's see if this is turned on for my tenant. But you can start training a model for a relevance-based rule, and this could be its own little community show. but pick a few attributes and have the model decide how to weight and balance out the rule for you. And then once the model has built its rule, spend some time to evaluate how that AI rule is performing compared to your existing rules, and maybe you can replace them.
That's a nice little roadmap. I like that. Great question, Sandro. So Mark says, and I think Stephen answered this, but let's make sure. Can match rules specifically filter criteria? So rule only valid for domestic versus international?
Yes, that's a great question. I'm going to jump to the docs here to kind of explain what you can do with that. So with binary rules, you can use the equals filter, which is effectively like a where clause in a SQL statement, to say where or equals where the role is international. And then that rule will only evaluate international entities. So with relevance-based matching, you get two options. There is the strict constraint and the weighted constraint. The strict constraint works the same way as the binary, where it just filters out. If you want to only consider international entities, you set equals type to international, and we're only going to consider international entities. The second option is weighted, and if you take a weighted constraint, it's treated just like a match attribute. So if it's international, that helps its case for being a match, but it doesn't have to be international to be a match. It just adds its weighted score to the total calculation, and it's just one factor among many. So when you're doing relevance-based rules, you have to think, am I only trying to evaluate these international ones by this rule? Then I want strict. Or is international just one factor of many on whether this should be a match? And then you'd want to go the weighted route.
Thanks, Joel. Newman says, one key enabler would be to have R matching scoring available on UI like VMatch, so it will simply simplify for stewards. I think that's just a comment. And then thinking aloud, say the master data has 2 email ID fields. So if a source system sends one email ID, can it try to match with either of the emails?
So most Reltio models have an email nest, and you might have 2 emails within that nest. You can absolutely match across the many-to-many emails from each entity. Now, if you have 2 entirely separate email attributes, right? You have one called work email and one called home email or something, and they're simple attributes. They're different attributes. I don't think you can match across different attributes at this time.
You know, that would probably be a good, sounds like another, ask that exact same question on the community. And then, you know, maybe somebody can go in and like Joel or somebody else can kind of go in and test it out and see, and then have a better response so that we, if that makes sense. Does that help, Joel? I mean, would that be something you could potentially do later, or do you pretty much know that's not going to work?
That would be wise. Yeah, I think that would be a good question to put, because I think you want to consider not just can you do it, but if should you do it. Maybe you want to reconsider your data model a little bit. But I'd be interested to see what constraints brought you to that data modeling decision to begin with too. A lot to consider.
Yeah. So can you mix binary and relevance rules, and how does Reltio handle the behavior? So does it apply binary rules first, then the relevance rules, which would be, you know, which would be applied to remaining entities that weren't already on a binary rule? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you can have both in the same tenant, and they aren't applied in any particular order. So if one evaluates to an auto match before the other, they're a match. If both of them evaluate to a potential match, they'll both show as a potential match on the screen. No preference or order or anything like that.
Cool. I really liked how you went into our docs and showed people stuff there. I mean, it's really, I think you seem to use it a lot and know exactly where stuff is. So
I spend too much time in the docs.
that's probably good. So one kind of question is, we're evaluating relevance match rule for new source. How we can get relevance match score for this for all source records without going through like a VerifyMatch API call, _ VerifyMatch API call. Is there?
That's going to be a community question. I don't know off the top of my head, but
okay,
that's a cool use case, and I would like to know the answer to that too. So
yeah, so ask that on community. This way we can find the right people to answer, and even if Joel wants to kind of go in. So Sandro, man, he's like usual. He's throwing out the questions. Love it. If binary identified potential match, but relevance reconciles to auto match, I'm assuming it will auto match. So it might be a good way to transition, as the goal is to get more auto matches and reduce the potential match pool. Question mark.
That's right, Sandro. Yeah, if as long as one rule evaluates to auto, that record will auto merge. So that's absolutely right.
Great. I think that's all the questions. If you stop sharing your screen. By the way, tomorrow we do have another community webinar. Certainly excited about that. You can see my screen, Joel. Is that right?
I can.
Great. So tomorrow's community webinar is, community show is Introduction to Survivorship Strategies, Rules, and Operational Values, OVCL. So that one is going to be really exciting. Different folks are going to be on that. I bet Joel shows up to that because he's probably highly interested in it too. The nice thing about these is our employees learn too. Remember tomorrow, and I'll show this tomorrow, and I'll even show kind of the link to where it's at. We're giving away some swag, and there'll be some rules of the road on community.reltio.com. One kind of caveat, if you're from India or Russia, I cannot ship those out yet on that, but we will have some options still for you so that you can participate. Joel, once again, thank you so much for coming and bringing some value to the community. Really appreciate it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this, push in the chat what you thought. And I like to always give good or, potential feedback that we need, to make these better. But yeah, Joel, this was good. Lots of great questions, lots of participation, and this will be recorded. And my hope is posted by tomorrow, but for sure by next week, for sure. Aaron says this is very informative. Seems like a great new set of tools, great session, and great capability. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you on the community, and I'll see most of you or some of you tomorrow. Thank you again. I'm going to stay on here for a minute or two. But welcome to the new year and the new Reltio episode community shows, and we'll have some more episodes starting tomorrow. As a matter of fact, tomorrow starts the first part of a series. So I'm trying to think about Netflix type talk. So Joel, I've got to kind of get in that mindset too. This is great. Really enjoyed it. I mean, a lot of fun.
I appreciate you. Everybody appreciates you pulling everything together. Thank you very much.
No worries. I was telling Joel earlier today, I was like, I'm a little nervous. I haven't done this in a month. So it's great to be back and lots of great content coming. I mean,